The night was unusually quiet on the streets of downtown Houston, with only the distant hum of traffic breaking the silence. Detective James Parker patrolled the area in his cruiser, eyes scanning for any hint of trouble. He was a man used to asserting control, a man who expected obedience without question. When his spotlight landed on Marcus Reed, standing near a street lamp, Parker felt the familiar rush of authority. "Evening, sir. Mind telling me what you're doing out here?" Parker's voice was sharp, carrying the subtle threat of implied power. Marcus looked up slowly, his calm eyes meeting Parker's with quiet confidence. He was impeccably dressed, carrying himself with a kind of composure that suggested intelligence and awareness beyond ordinary civilians. "Just heading home, detective," Marcus replied evenly, his tone polite yet firm. "Evening traffic is heavier than usual." Parker's eyes narrowed. There was something about Marcus that unnerved him, not immediately obvious, but a presence, a subtle command in the way he spoke and moved. "Still," Parker continued, focusing on what he could control. "License and registration," he demanded, leaning slightly toward the window, the authority in his posture unmistakable. Marcus complied, producing the documents carefully. "Here you go," he said, handing them over without a trace of hesitation. Parker inspected the papers, pretending to scrutinize them while internally questioning why he felt uneasy. He decided to push further. "Do you know why I stopped you?" he asked, trying to assert dominance. "No, detective. I'm not sure," Marcus answered calmly, his voice unwavering. Parker's frustration began to show. He thrived on compliance, and this man's serene confidence irritated him. "You were walking in a restricted area, could be considered suspicious." His words were loaded, meant to provoke. Marcus shook his head gently. "I wasn't aware of any restrictions. I assure you I'm not a threat to anyone." The detective's hand hovered near his holster, a reflexive gesture that Marcus noticed but did not flinch at. There was no panic, no nervous twitch, only steady composure. Something about this made Parker more aggressive, needing to regain control. "I think we need to take a closer look," Parker said, signaling Marcus to follow him to the cruiser. As Marcus complied, Parker radioed in, fabricating minor discrepancies in the report, intending to justify a temporary detention. He was confident that the situation was fully under his control. Yet, as they approached the cruiser, Marcus's calm and collected demeanor sent a small ripple of doubt through Parker's mind, a feeling he quickly dismissed. Little did Parker know, Marcus Reed was not an ordinary citizen. Every step he took was measured, every word deliberate. Beneath his unassuming exterior was a man trained in authority, law, and strategy, someone who would soon turn the tables entirely, revealing that Parker's arrogance had led him straight into a trap he didn't even see coming. As the cruiser's door clicked shut, the tension between them was palpable. One man clung to false power and assumption, the other radiated quiet confidence and unseen authority. And the night, still calm and dark, bore silent witness to the first act of a confrontation that would shatter presumptions and expose the true nature of justice. The fluorescent lights of the precinct flickered overhead, casting a sterile glow across the small interrogation room. The walls were bare, save for a clock that ticked steadily, each second amplifying the tension in the air. Marcus Reed sat calmly at the metal table, hands folded, posture straight, eyes alert. Across from him, Detective James Parker slammed a file onto the table with a sharp thud, the sound echoing ominously. "Mr. Reed," Parker began, leaning forward, his voice low and firm, "we've got some questions about your activities tonight. Your presence near that construction site. It raises concerns." He studied Marcus carefully, hoping to detect even the slightest flicker of nervousness. Marcus looked at him evenly, his expression composed. "I understand, Detective. I assure you, I was merely walking home. Nothing more." Parker scoffed, clearly irritated by the lack of fear in Marcus's tone. He slid a few papers across the table, fingerprints, minor violations, and reports of suspicious activity. "These came up during the routine checks," Parker said, emphasizing each word. "And your name popped up more than once. Care to explain that?" Marcus picked up the top sheet, scanning it quickly but with deliberate care. "I don't see anything here that justifies suspicion," he said, voice calm yet measured. "And I've done nothing illegal tonight." Parker leaned back, his fingers drumming on the table in impatience. He wasn't used to civilians responding this way. Normally he expected panic, stammering, or at least some sign of discomfort. But Marcus's composure unnerved him. He decided to escalate. "You think I don't see what's going on here?" Parker snapped. "We have witnesses saying you were loitering, acting suspicious. You could be involved in more serious crimes. You realize how serious this could get?" Marcus's gaze never wavered. "I do, Detective. And that's why I'm being cooperative. I don't want any misunderstandings." He spoke with precision, every word deliberate, as if he were aware of the weight his tone carried. Parker's frustration boiled over. He leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "Don't play games with me. I know people like you, they think they can talk their way out of anything. But lying to me will only make things worse for you." Marcus finally allowed a subtle, knowing smile, just enough to catch Parker off guard. "Detective, I'm not lying. I'm simply stating the truth. That's all I can do." For a moment, Parker hesitated. There was something different about Marcus. Not arrogance, not fear, but confidence rooted in knowledge. Parker couldn't place it, and that made him reckless. He tried to regain control, pressing harder, presenting more false claims, fabricating evidence to intimidate. Yet Marcus remained unshaken, responding with calm, factual answers that exposed the cracks in Parker's narrative without overtly challenging him. The clock ticked on, the room growing heavier with unspoken tension. Each minute that passed amplified Parker's agitation and Marcus's unyielding composure. Unbeknownst to Parker, every response Marcus gave was strategic, a subtle display of awareness, patience, and authority that would soon completely upend the power dynamic. By the end of the session, Parker walked away from the table frustrated, muttering about difficult suspects, while Marcus remained seated, calm, collected, and unreadable, a quiet storm waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. The early morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Marcus Reed's apartment, cutting across the polished wood floors and reflecting off the neat stacks of documents on his desk. Marcus sat in a high-backed chair, reviewing notes and court paperwork. Though the arrest had been minor, he knew the stakes were higher than Parker realized. Every detail mattered, and every word spoken in court could shift the outcome dramatically. His attorney, Sarah Collins, entered the room briskly, her leather briefcase in hand and a determined expression on her face. Sarah was a seasoned criminal defense lawyer, known for her ability to read both the law and the people in front of her. "Morning, Marcus," she said, setting her briefcase down. "I've gone over Parker's report. He's already stretching the truth, and we need to prepare for every angle." Marcus nodded, his calm demeanor unwavering. "I expected nothing less," he replied. "We anticipate his exaggerations. I want to focus on staying factual and composed." Sarah smiled faintly, impressed by his foresight. "Good. That composure will work in your favor. But there's something else you'll need to assert your authority carefully if things get out of hand. Parker tends to react poorly when he thinks he's in control." Marcus leaned back slightly, fingers steepled. "I'm aware. I won't escalate unnecessarily. I want the truth to speak for itself." His tone was deliberate, controlled, and it carried the kind of quiet confidence that could unsettle even the most overbearing officer. They reviewed the key points together: Parker's fabricated charges, inconsistencies in his report, and witnesses whose statements could be questioned. Sarah emphasized the importance of staying calm during the hearing. If Parker tries to provoke you, don't rise to it. Let the evidence and your demeanor do the work. That's when the courtroom notices credibility. Marcus nodded again, reviewing the documents with meticulous care. Each paper, each witness note, each minor procedural detail was another piece of the puzzle he had already begun solving in his mind. He noticed subtle errors in Parker's report, slightly off times, vague descriptions, inconsistencies that hinted at exaggeration or fabrication. As they continued, Marcus spoke quietly, almost to himself. "He underestimates the weight of federal procedures. That will become apparent soon enough." Sarah paused, recognizing the underlying implication. Marcus was more than a calm defendant. He was someone trained to understand authority and law at a higher level, and he intended to use that knowledge when the time came. By mid-morning, the two had rehearsed potential exchanges with Parker, predicting likely provocations and planning measured responses. Every word, every pause, Every tone had been carefully considered. Marcus wanted no misstep that could give Parker leverage. Finally, they packed the documents neatly into folders and left for the courthouse. Marcus's expression was serene, his stride confident. The tension that had begun on the street and at the precinct was now concentrated into a single purpose: the courtroom. There, his composure, knowledge, and authority would all come into play, setting the stage for the confrontation that Parker did not yet realize was coming. Outside, the city buzzed with the usual morning activity, oblivious to the quiet storm that Marcus was preparing to unleash, a storm that would soon shatter assumptions and reveal a hidden truth about power, law, and justice. The marble steps of the Harris County Courthouse gleamed under the morning sun, each footfall echoing against the grand facade. Marcus Reed approached calmly, his posture straight, his expression composed. Inside, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Courthouse staff hurried along, papers clutched under arms, while a handful of early spectators settled into the wooden benches, unaware that they were about to witness a confrontation that would turn presumptions upside down. Detective James Parker arrived moments later, his uniform crisp, badge gleaming, and eyes fixed on Marcus as if daring him to show any sign of weakness. Parker thrived on intimidation, and he believed the courthouse was his stage, an arena where authority and fear went hand in hand. But Marcus's steady demeanor immediately challenged that assumption. As they entered the courtroom, Judge Ellen Thompson presided at the bench, her gaze sharp and authoritative. She was known for fairness, but she would not tolerate any theatrics from those trying to manipulate the system. Marcus and Parker took their respective positions, Marcus near his attorney, Parker standing at the prosecution's table, each aware that the first exchange could set the tone for the entire hearing. Parker wasted no time. He straightened, attempting to assert dominance. "Your Honor, we are here regarding a suspect detained last night," he said, voice firm, scanning the room to emphasize control. "The individual in question was found acting suspiciously and may be involved in violations that demand immediate attention." Marcus, seated beside Sarah Collins, remained composed. He spoke only when addressed, choosing his words with deliberate care. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Parker's rigid intensity. The judge noted the contrast immediately, her eyes briefly flicking from Parker to Marcus, sensing a tension beyond ordinary procedural matters. Parker leaned slightly forward, attempting to project authority, and muttered under his breath for Marcus to hear, "You'll regret making this difficult for me." Marcus's eyes met Parker's, unflinching, and he replied softly but audibly, "I'm only here to ensure the truth is known." Parker's expression tightened ever so slightly, an unspoken acknowledgement that this man was different from the usual suspects he handled. The courtroom settled into a tense rhythm as the proceedings began. Parker presented his version of events, stretching the truth and emphasizing suspicion. Witnesses called to validate his claims were met with strategic questions from Sarah Collins, and Marcus responded succinctly and factually when necessary. Every gesture, every word, every pause was calculated, demonstrating composure and authority, subtly undermining Parker's attempts at intimidation. Even the bystanders could feel the shift. The man who had been treated as a mere defendant carried himself with a quiet confidence that unsettled the officer. Parker's usual tools of fear and aggression seemed less effective here, and the courtroom itself became a stage for a different kind of power, one based on truth, strategy, and presence rather than intimidation. By the end of the first hour, it was clear that this would not be a standard hearing. Parker's overconfidence was already cracking, while Marcus's calm authority projected a silent warning. The balance of power in this room was about to shift dramatically. The courtroom was quiet, the air thick with anticipation, as the preliminary hearing commenced. Judge Ellen Thompson presided with her usual stern demeanor, tapping her gavel lightly to call the room to order. Detective James Parker rose, straightening his uniform and adjusting the papers before him. He cleared his throat, projecting confidence as if the courtroom itself belonged to him. "Your Honor," Parker began, voice firm and deliberate, "the defendant, Marcus Reed, was detained last night under circumstances that raise significant concern. Surveillance and witness statements indicate suspicious behavior near a restricted construction site. Based on these findings, it's clear that Mr. Reed may have been involved in unlawful activity." Marcus, seated beside his attorney Sarah Collins, remained calm, his hands folded neatly on the table. He did not flinch, did not shift uncomfortably, and most importantly, did not allow Parker's tone to provoke him. His calmness alone began to subtly influence the courtroom atmosphere. Judge Thompson leaned forward slightly, reviewing the case file Parker had submitted. "Detective Parker, can you clarify the specific nature of these so-called unlawful activities?" she asked, her voice measured. "The report seems vague." Parker's jaw tightened. He had anticipated that his carefully constructed story would go unquestioned, but the judge's scrutiny introduced an unplanned challenge. "Your Honor, the defendant was seen loitering, and witnesses claim they observed him engaging in suspicious conduct. While the full scope is under investigation, the patterns suggest intent that cannot be ignored." Sarah Collins interjected smoothly. "Your Honor, with all due respect, the so-called patterns appear to be assumptions. Mr. Reed was simply walking home. There is no evidence indicating criminal intent." Parker's eyes flicked toward Marcus, frustration evident in the sharp line of his jaw. Marcus, however, remained perfectly composed, meeting Parker's gaze without a hint of fear or agitation. Each measured response from Marcus subtly exposed Parker's exaggerations, creating cracks in the officer's narrative. Witnesses called by Parker provided statements that were inconsistent, minor contradictions emerging under Sarah's careful questioning. Each discrepancy, no matter how small, added weight to the impression that Parker's version of events might not be entirely truthful. Marcus responded only when necessary, succinctly correcting factual inaccuracies with calm authority. By the midpoint of the hearing, the courtroom tension had shifted. Parker's confident posture began to falter as subtle murmurs from the jury and observers highlighted the weakness in his testimony. His lies, once tools of power, were becoming liabilities. Marcus's calm demeanor, precise language, and quiet but unwavering presence began to dominate the room's focus. Even the judge's eyes hinted at skepticism. Thompson's tone remained formal but carried an undercurrent of doubt. "Detective, please ensure your statements are based strictly on verified facts, not assumptions or hearsay," she cautioned. Parker nodded, though the irritation and unease were clear. Marcus's quiet authority was already at work, undermining Parker's facade without confrontation. The audience could feel the reversal beginning. The cop, who believed he controlled the narrative, was now on precarious ground. The foundation of Parker's lies had begun to crumble, setting the stage for the revelation that would soon shift the courtroom's balance entirely. The courtroom hummed with anticipation as the cross-examination began. Parker, visibly tense, approached the witness stand, trying to maintain a veneer of control. His confidence, once unshakable, had begun to crack under the subtle pressure Marcus and his attorney, Sarah Collins, were exerting. "Detective Parker," Sarah began, her tone calm and precise, "you claim that Mr. Reed was acting suspiciously near the construction site. Can you specify what exactly constituted suspicious behavior?" Parker hesitated, choosing his words carefully, aware that any slip could expose the inconsistencies in his report. "Well, he was walking in a restricted area, near equipment, and did you personally witness him engage in any illegal activity?" Sarah interrupted smoothly, her eyes steady on Parker. Parker faltered. "No, not directly, but the witnesses—" "Which witnesses exactly? Are their statements consistent, or did they provide conflicting accounts?" Sarah pressed. Parker shifted uneasily. He hadn't anticipated his witnesses being scrutinized so thoroughly. A bead of sweat formed at his temple as he fumbled for an answer. They were consistent enough," he muttered. Marcus, seated at the defense table, remained composed, his hands folded and eyes calmly observing. He did not interrupt, letting Sarah's questions guide the courtroom's perception. Every pause, every hesitation from Parker amplified the contrast between the detective's nervousness and Marcus's steady authority. "Detective," Sarah continued, "you also claim Mr. Reed loitered suspiciously. Can you define loitering in this context? Are you suggesting intent without evidence?" Parker's jaw tightened, frustration flashing in his eyes. His attempts at intimidation were failing. He could feel the courtroom turning against him, the weight of scrutiny pressing down. I meant he appeared out of place," he stammered, his words losing their former certainty. Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm and deliberate. Your Honor, if I may clarify, he leaned slightly forward, eyes on the judge. At no point was I engaging in any illegal activity. My movements were lawful, and any perceived suspicious behavior as a misinterpretation of ordinary conduct. The courtroom absorbed his words. Parker's eyes narrowed, realizing that Marcus was not just defending himself, he was establishing undeniable credibility. Every statement Marcus made was measured, factual, and authoritative. Judge Thompson's gaze flicked from Marcus to Parker. "Detective, please stick to verifiable facts," she said. "Assumptions and interpretations do not constitute evidence." Parker's frustration became more evident. He attempted to regain composure, pressing harder with follow-up questions, but each effort only highlighted the contradictions in his earlier claims. Marcus, unwavering, answered concisely, correcting inaccuracies without aggression, and the courtroom audience began to notice the shift. By the end of the cross-examination, Parker's credibility had taken a significant hit. His lies and exaggerations were now apparent, while Marcus's calm demeanor and precise answers had positioned him as the voice of reason and authority. The tension in the room was palpable. One man's arrogance had begun to crumble under the quiet power of truth. The stage was set. Parker's facade was weakening, and Marcus's hidden strength, still mostly unseen, was quietly taking control. The courtroom drama was only intensifying, and the revelation that would shatter assumptions was still just around the corner. The courtroom was silent, save for the soft rustle of papers and the occasional tap of a gavel. Judge Ellen Thompson leaned forward, her eyes scanning the documents laid before her. The tension in the room had shifted subtly over the past hour. Detective James Parker, once brimming with confidence, now fidgeted slightly in his chair, the strain of scrutiny visible in the tight line of his jaw. "Detective Parker," the judge began, voice measured, "we will now review the submitted evidence. Please confirm the origin and accuracy of each document." Parker nodded briskly, though unease lingered beneath his controlled exterior. He began presenting his reports. Witness statements, patrol notes, and minor procedural observations. At first glance, everything seemed in order, but under careful examination, inconsistencies began to appear. Times didn't align perfectly. Statements from different witnesses contradicted each other in subtle ways. Sarah Collins took her opportunity. "Your Honor, may I point out a few discrepancies?" she asked, rising calmly. "First, several witness statements do not match the timeline Detective Parker has presented. Second, some of the patrol notes appear to contain assumptions rather than verifiable facts. Finally, the so-called evidence of suspicious activity is circumstantial at best." Parker's eyes flicked toward Marcus, frustration and anxiety creeping into his expression. He had counted on the courtroom accepting his narrative without challenge. Instead, Marcus's calm presence amplified every flaw in Parker's reports. Marcus finally spoke, his voice quiet but deliberate. "Your Honor, I would like to clarify one point. At no time did I engage in any illegal behavior. The locations and actions described in the reports are either inaccurate or misinterpreted. I can provide documentation and context to support this." He handed over neatly organized records, timestamps, access permits, and procedural paperwork. The documents were meticulous, leaving little room for doubt. Even the most casual observer could see that Marcus's preparation was thorough and precise. Judge Thompson's gaze sharpened as she reviewed the files. "Detective Parker, can you confirm the accuracy of these records against your reports?" she asked. Parker hesitated, swallowing nervously. The cracks in his story were now undeniable. "Well, they are mostly accurate, Your Honor, but—" "No buts," Sarah interrupted softly. "These records provide an objective account. Any discrepancies in Detective Parker's statements should be considered carefully, given the potential for exaggeration or assumption." The courtroom murmured slightly as the judge made notes. Parker's usual aura of control had evaporated, replaced by visible tension. Every subtle misstatement, every half-truth he had tried to pass off as fact, was now highlighted under the combined scrutiny of Marcus, Sarah, and the court. Marcus's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Parker's growing unease. He remained seated, composed, allowing the evidence to speak for itself. The courtroom, already leaning toward skepticism of Parker's claims, began to sense that the narrative the officer had presented was unraveling. By the end of the evidence review, it was clear. Parker's authority, once assumed and unquestioned, had been weakened. Marcus's methodical preparation and unshakable composure had turned the tide subtly but decisively. The stage was now set for the subtle revelations that would soon expose the full extent of his hidden power. The courtroom had grown heavy with tension. Detective James Parker sat at the prosecution table, his posture rigid, the confident arrogance that had carried him through countless cases beginning to crack under the weight of scrutiny. Every statement he had made, every assumption he had presented, now appeared fragile under the calm and precise examination by Marcus Reed and his attorney, Sarah Collins. Marcus, seated beside Sarah, remained serene, his gaze steady, his hands resting lightly on the neatly stacked files before him. The subtle power of his presence was palpable. He didn't need to raise his voice, gesticulate dramatically, or argue aggressively. Every measured glance, every precise word carried authority. The courtroom sensed it, even Parker, though he refused to admit it aloud. Judge Ellen Thompson glanced down at the documents, then at Marcus. "Mr. Reed, is there anything you wish to add regarding these discrepancies?" she asked. Marcus leaned forward slightly, voice calm but deliberate. "Yes, Your Honor. While Detective Parker has presented witness accounts and his observations as factual, some of the interpretations are inaccurate. There is additional context that clarifies my actions last night." He slid a folder across the table, untouched until now, labeled clearly with official markings. Parker's eyes flicked to it immediately, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his expression. Marcus's movements were deliberate, unhurried, and precise, a subtle display of authority that suggested he had full control over the narrative. "Detective," Marcus continued, "some of the reports include assumptions about my location and activity that are not supported by verifiable evidence. I can provide official documentation confirming my lawful presence and intent." Parker's jaw tightened. His mind raced. He hadn't anticipated this level of preparation. Marcus wasn't merely defending himself, he was gently asserting dominance over the facts. Each word was a controlled signal, a subtle hint that Marcus's influence extended beyond the courtroom. The courtroom audience sensed the shift. Jurors, spectators, even the clerks noticed that Parker's confident composure was waning. Marcus's calm, almost effortless authority contrasted sharply with Parker's growing frustration. Sarah Collins seized the moment. "Your Honor, these documents demonstrate that Mr. Reed's actions were entirely lawful. Any perception of suspicious behavior is a misunderstanding and not supported by the evidence." Marcus nodded, maintaining eye contact with Parker for a brief moment, a silent reminder that he was fully aware of the officer's attempts to intimidate him. Parker's glare was sharp, but Marcus remained unfazed. His demeanor was not just calm, it was commanding in a way that implied deeper power and experience, though the full extent remained unrevealed. By the end of the session, subtle whispers circulated in the courtroom. Parker's arrogance had begun to falter under scrutiny. Marcus had not yet revealed the full scope of his authority, but the hints were clear. He was no ordinary defendant. The courtroom, already leaning toward doubt regarding Parker's credibility, now understood that this confrontation was about far more than a simple minor violation. It was about power, law, and authority. As the gavel struck to adjourn the session, Parker sat back, tense and visibly unsettled, while Marcus collected his documents with calm precision. One thing was certain: the stage was now set for a dramatic revelation, and Parker had no idea just how high the stakes would climb in the next moments. The courtroom fell into a tense hush as the proceedings resumed. Detective James Parker sat at the prosecution table, visibly agitated, trying to mask the unease that had been building since the evidence review and subtle hints from Marcus Reed. He had expected a routine hearing, a simple display of his authority, but everything was unraveling before his eyes. Marcus, calm and composed, rose slightly from his seat, clearing his throat. His voice was steady, carrying the weight of authority without aggression. "Your Honor," he began, "I believe it is necessary to clarify my position and role to prevent any further misunderstanding regarding my presence and actions last night." Parker's eyes narrowed, sensing the significance of Marcus's tone but unsure what was coming. Marcus reached into his briefcase and pulled out a set of official credentials, placing them on the table with deliberate care. The courtroom audience leaned in, curious, murmuring quietly among themselves. Judge Ellen Thompson peered at the documents, her eyebrows rising slightly. "Mr. Reed, can you explain?" she asked. Marcus looked directly at Parker, his calm gaze unwavering. "I am a federal agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Detective Parker. My presence last night was part of official duties unrelated to the matters you've reported. Every action you've interpreted as suspicious is documented and lawful within federal jurisdiction." A stunned silence rippled through the courtroom. Parker's confident demeanor shattered in an instant. The arrogance that had defined him for so many cases crumbled as the weight of Marcus's revelations sank in. His mouth opened slightly, searching for words, but none came. The judge's gavel struck lightly against the bench. "Detective Parker," she said firmly, "it appears that your reports may have misrepresented the situation. I expect full transparency regarding the circumstances of this case." Marcus remained composed, his presence commanding attention without raising his voice. "Your Honor, I am prepared to provide all necessary documentation and testimony to clarify my lawful actions. Any prior assumptions or statements implying wrongdoing are unfounded and must be reconsidered in light of verified federal authority." The courtroom audience reacted gasps, whispered exclamations, and a noticeable shift in energy filled the room. Parker sat frozen, his earlier bluster and intimidation utterly defeated. His lies, once a tool of dominance, were now exposed as fabrications in front of the judge, the attorney, and the spectators. Sarah Collins gave Marcus a subtle nod, acknowledging his strategic timing and precise execution of the reveal. Marcus's calm composure contrasted starkly with Parker's shaken state. It was no longer a matter of debate. The power dynamic had shifted entirely. By the end of the session, Parker slumped slightly in his chair, visibly humiliated, while Marcus gathered his documents with deliberate grace. The courtroom had witnessed a dramatic reversal. The man who had attempted to intimidate and manipulate was now fully exposed, and the quiet authority of Marcus Reed, previously hinted at, now dominated the space completely. The revelation was not just about federal authority, it was a testament to preparation, composure, and the triumph of truth over arrogance. Parker had learned, too late, that assumptions of power without verification could lead to public exposure and undeniable accountability. The courtroom was electrified. The quiet hum of anticipation had erupted into whispered conversations as everyone processed the revelation. Marcus Reed was a federal agent. Detective James Parker, once brimming with self-assured authority, now sat frozen, his usual confidence replaced by visible tension and confusion. Every gesture he had used to assert control over the case, the slamming of files, the stern glares, the clipped orders, had been dismantled in a single calm declaration. Judge Ellen Thompson cleared her throat, restoring order. "Detective Parker," she said, her tone precise and controlled, "it appears that certain statements submitted under your name may not accurately reflect the events of last night. I expect a full and immediate clarification." Parker swallowed hard, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. The courtroom audience, bystanders, clerks, and witnesses alike watched intently, sensing the unraveling of the officer's credibility. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words faltered. What he had once controlled with arrogance now slipped through his fingers like sand. Marcus remained seated, calm and composed, his demeanor untouched by the heightened tension around him. He did not need to raise his voice. His authority radiated quietly but undeniably. The documents he had provided earlier, official timestamps, permits, and federal orders were irrefutable, leaving Parker's prior accusations exposed as exaggerations, misinterpretations, or outright fabrications. Sarah Collins addressed the court, her voice steady. "Your Honor, these documents, combined with Mr. Reed's testimony, demonstrate that Detective Parker's claims were not fully substantiated. The facts clearly contradict the narrative he attempted to establish." The courtroom murmured, a mixture of surprise and acknowledgement. Parker's colleagues shifted uncomfortably, aware of the severity of the officer's misstep. Parker himself sat rigidly, his face tight, as the magnitude of his misjudgment settled over him. He had overstepped, assuming control over someone far more prepared, far more authoritative than he had realized. Marcus's presence and composure magnified the impact of Parker's failure. He didn't need to gloat. And he didn't. Every word he had spoken, every document he had presented, and every calm gesture contributed to a narrative that left Parker's falsehoods in the light, where they could no longer hide. Judge Thompson nodded slightly, acknowledging the shift in credibility. It is clear that this matter requires careful consideration of the documented facts. Detective Parker, your role in the reporting of this case must be reviewed to ensure accuracy in future proceedings. The statement was firm, but restrained a public admonishment that made Parker's error undeniable. The bystanders and courtroom staff exchanged glances, witnessing a rare but powerful moment. A law enforcement officer humbled by the very system he believed he controlled. Parker's attempts to dominate, intimidate, and manipulate had not only failed, but backfired spectacularly, placing him under scrutiny while elevating Marcus Reed's credibility and authority. As the session drew to a close, Parker sat silently, slumped in defeat, while Marcus collected his documents and remained poised. The stage was set for the final adjudication, where justice, once obscured by arrogance and deception, would finally be restored. The courtroom was charged with a tense, anticipatory silence. After hours of testimony, cross-examinations, and meticulous evidence review, all attention was now on Judge Ellen Thompson as she prepared to deliver her ruling. Detective James Parker sat at the prosecution table, his shoulders stiff, jaw tight. Every ounce of the arrogance he had carried into the courthouse was gone, replaced with frustration and unease. His overconfidence had collapsed under the calm authority of Marcus Reed, and he now faced the consequences in full view of the courtroom. Judge Thompson adjusted her glasses and glanced at the files before her. After careful review of the submitted evidence, witness testimony, and statements provided by all parties, it is clear that the defendant, Mr. Marcus Reed, acted within his lawful rights at all times. Her voice carried firm finality, leaving no room for ambiguity. Parker's hand twitched slightly, the movement betraying his discomfort. He had attempted to control the narrative with lies, exaggerations, and intimidation, but Marcus's composed responses, combined with irrefutable documentation, had dismantled every claim. The judge continued, her tone deliberate and commanding. Any prior reports suggesting misconduct or illegal behavior on the part of Mr. Reed are hereby nullified. The charges are dismissed, and any actions taken based on inaccurate assumptions are to be reviewed. A murmur of approval rippled through the courtroom. Marcus remained seated, calm and composed, but the subtle nod he gave to his attorney, Sarah Collins, spoke volumes. The strategy, preparation, and measured responses had worked perfectly. Justice had prevailed, and the balance of power had been restored. Judge Thompson then turned her attention directly to Parker. Detective Parker, given the inconsistencies in your reports and the misrepresentations presented today, your actions will be subject to an internal review. Accuracy and integrity are paramount in law enforcement, and deviations from these standards carry consequences. The public admonishment struck Parker like a thunderbolt. His earlier attempts to assert dominance, intimidate, and fabricate evidence had led not only to personal humiliation, but also to professional accountability. The courtroom witnessed a rare but essential moment. A law enforcement officer being held responsible for overstepping authority. Marcus stood, collecting his documents with composed precision. He had not sought confrontation. He had relied on truth, preparation, and patience. As he moved toward the exit, the courtroom audience watched with a mix of respect and awe. Parker remained seated, silent, a stark contrast to the composed and dignified figure of Marcus, walking confidently down the aisle. Outside the courtroom, reporters and bystanders caught glimpses of the resolution. Marcus's calm authority, methodical preparation, and unwavering commitment to truth had ensured not just his own vindication, but also a clear demonstration of accountability within the system. Parker, on the other hand, had learned a harsh lesson in humility and responsibility. Justice had been restored, not through confrontation or aggression, but through meticulous preparation, composure, and strategic presentation of undeniable facts. Marcus Reed had turned the courtroom into a stage where integrity triumphed over arrogance, and the principles of law were upheld for all to see. The courthouse steps were bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, casting long shadows across the marble. Marcus Reed walked steadily down the steps, his posture relaxed yet deliberate, every movement reflecting calm authority. The tension that had filled the courtroom hours earlier now dissipated, replaced by a profound sense of resolution. Each step he took was measured, purposeful, as if the very act of walking away symbolized the restoration of justice and balance. Detective James Parker lingered near the entrance, shoulders slumped, visibly humbled. The weight of the courtroom's judgment and the public exposure of his lies pressed heavily upon him. For the first time in years, he had faced the consequences of overconfidence and manipulation. Parker's humiliation was complete. An officer brought low not by force or anger, but by truth, preparation, and composure. Marcus paused for a moment at the top of the steps, looking out over the crowd that had gathered bystanders, clerks, and reporters who had witnessed the full unfolding of the trial. In their faces, he saw reflection, curiosity, and respect. He did not need to boast or assert himself. The quiet authority he had exercised throughout the day had spoken louder than words ever could. He reflected on the events of the past hours, the street confrontation, the tense interrogation, the calculated courtroom exchanges, and the meticulous presentation of evidence. Each moment had been a test of patience, composure, and strategic thinking. He had relied not on aggression, intimidation, or posturing, but on preparation, knowledge of the law, and an unwavering commitment to truth. These principles had not only vindicated him but also revealed the fragility of unchecked arrogance. Marcus thought briefly of Parker, not with anger, but with measured understanding. The officer had overestimated his own authority and underestimated the power of diligence and integrity. In many ways, this confrontation was as much a lesson for Parker as it was a vindication for Marcus. Power, when wielded without responsibility or accountability, is fragile. Authority, when backed by truth and preparation, is unshakable. As he descended the steps, Marcus's mind turned to the broader implications. The encounter was more than a personal victory. It was a demonstration of the principles that govern justice. Accountability, integrity, and careful adherence to procedure were not abstract ideals. They were practical tools for navigating conflict, exposing deception, and protecting the innocent. He reached the bottom of the steps, inhaling the crisp afternoon air. The courthouse behind him, once a stage for tension and confrontation, now stood as a monument to order, fairness, and the triumph of truth. Marcus walked toward the waiting street, blending seamlessly into the rhythm of the city. His presence remained understated, yet every movement conveyed the same quiet confidence that had carried him through the day. In that moment, Marcus Reed became more than a defendant or a federal agent. He became a symbol, a reminder that calm authority, careful preparation, and unwavering adherence to truth can overcome arrogance, deception, and intimidation. The city moved around him, unaware of the lessons etched into that day's events, but for those who had witnessed it, the judge, the audience, and even the humbled detective, the story of accountability and justice would linger long after Marcus had vanished into the ordinary flow of life.